We're now joined by the Chairperson of the Coalition Oversight Group, Dr Mulder, to get a sense of what came out of their meeting today, earlier in the afternoon. Dr Mulder, good evening, and thank you so much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. And let's start right there. Are coalition partners still committed to this coalition? I'll tell you why. It's not just this particular matter of what went down last night in council, but even before this, for example, we were hearing a blow of words, exchange of words, quite strong words between, for example, Action SA and the DA over the executive mayor of Corne, literally calling each other thieves, if you want to say it that way. Another one saying, no, they are lying. You know, and there's just this constant insulting of each other in public, yet you are in coalition. Is there a commitment to this coalition, and what are the challenges?
Let me start off by saying that we must understand that the whole notion of coalitions are something new. It's something that we have not experienced in the past in South Africa, really. It was inevitable that we will end up with coalitions because of our electoral system. Our electoral system, which is strictly proportional, asks basically for coalitions, and we are now at that point. So it's a learning curve for all of the parties and all the people involved in these coalitions that will go through that process. You are correct that there are sometimes some differences between the parties. Remember, we are coming from different political parties with different objectives, etc. But the parties involved in these coalition governments also understand and know that they need one another, that no one can govern on their own, and that we have to find each other, and that is being done in terms of coalitions, and that's why we negotiated a very elaborate coalition agreement. And we are acting in terms of that agreement. So if you ask me the question if parties are still committed, I can assure you more committed than ever before, because we understand the alternative. The only alternative to what we are doing at the moment is that with these metros, specifically in Gauteng, will go back under ANC rule, and that is something too ghastly to contemplate.
Is it elaborate enough to say, I'm talking about the agreement, what needs to happen, for example, around the councillors of, I think it's ATM, it's probably IFP, and it's ACDP, who seemingly have voted with the ANC on the motion to remove the council speaker for the city of Johannesburg?
Yes. Well, let me put it this way. First of all, we had a meeting today, and all the parties that are part of the coalition governments in specifically the metros of Gauteng, they are all committed to remain part of the coalition agreements, and we are all committed in that sense. And the problem does not lie with these parties or their leadership. We are talking about some individual councillors who decided on their own to go rogue and to vote outside the mandate or the agreed positions that we took in the joint caucus. Now, it may be interesting, there may be some developments tomorrow around 11 o'clock, when there may be some charges laid, because it's becoming clearer now that there's been some shenanigans going on in terms of trying to convince councillors to vote a certain way, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. So in terms of the coalition agreement, it's also, we respect the individuality of all the different parties, and each party will now, in terms of their own constitution and in terms of their own procedures and processes, deal with that in discretion by some of these councillors who voted last night with the ANC and the EFF. But if you look at the numbers specifically in the city of Johannesburg, in the end the result was 136 against 132. So you're talking about 2 or 3 councillors, and you've correctly mentioned, we're talking about 1 from the IFP and 2 from the ACDP, basically, and 1 from COPE. So I believe that those parties will deal with that, and obviously it will motivate all of us in the coalition governments to get our act together and to consolidate our position. Yeah.
Without preempting your big announcement tomorrow, we had the leader of caucus of the Democratic Alliance, Solomon Simang, with us here at Newsroom Africa earlier on. He did mention that there will be some affidavits being given under oath of these allegations of bribery and all sorts of things that have taken place. Were these presented in your meeting?
Yes, we discussed that in our meeting today, and we discussed the implications of that, and let's see where it goes, because one thing that we should never underestimate, the ANC and the EFF are not really Democrats. They do not accept the fact that they were rejected by the electorate in the election of last year in November, and they are trying on a daily basis to subvert what we are trying to do, and they are not the loyal opposition in that instance. they must understand, they must accept that they've lost power, but they're not prepared to do so, so they're trying to undermine and subvert these coalition governments. But obviously we understand that, and I'm looking forward towards 2024, and then I realize we will have the same challenge when we come to 2024, and we expect the ANC to hand over the keys of the union buildings.
Yeah. Is there such a thing, I mean, from your conversations, as a coalition of minority parties that is almost forming itself on the side of the broader multi-party government that you have formed in the city of Johannesburg?
Well, not really. There was an attempt, and that's interesting that you mentioned this. There was an attempt by some of these individual councillors who voted the way they did last night to try and get that kind of arrangement, to form some kind of minority coalition or some minority group. But we are aware of that, and the fact of the matter is that the national and provincial leadership of all these parties in the coalition agreements are absolutely united and are absolutely convinced that what we need to do, and will continue to do so, that actually there's no reason for some minorities to try to arrange something within the coalition, because if you look at the representation, we have one-member parties in some of these metros, and their people are absolutely accommodated, and they are in very senior positions within those provincial, those metro governments.
Yeah. Are you absolutely convinced that there is an equal appreciation of each member in this coalition? One would say that the DA is not running this as a multi-party coalition. They are running it as if it's a DA administration.
No, I can assure you, I'm acting as the chairperson of both the coalition oversight group as well as the technical committee. That's the last thing that I would allow to happen. And obviously, as I've said, it's a learning curve also for the DA to understand that they are no longer in a position where they can govern by themselves. That's why in the coalition agreement you'll find a provision that says never to refer to these coalitions as a one-party led or led by this or other. And sometimes the media still refer to some of these things as DA-led. They are not DA-led. These coalitions are multi-party governments, and they are formed in terms of the coalition agreement. And they consist of multi-party, number of political parties. But what also needs to be understood, some of these decisions are taken by sufficient consensus. You can't have in a council, for example, where one party, let's say, for example, the DA would have 71 members, and another coalition partner will have one vote. You cannot treat that on an equal basis in terms of allowing a one-member party to veto decisions being taken. We try to take all decisions by way of consensus. We succeed mostly. Sometimes it may be necessary to go into sufficient consensus. The coalition agreement makes provision for that. But there's no animosity between the parties within the coalition in terms of how we arrange things. We meet on a weekly basis. We do these things in terms of a joint strategy. It may be that one or two individual councillors may feel that they've not been accommodated. And let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, there may be a party with 3 councillors in the city of Johannesburg. In terms of the arrangement of the government, one of them may serve in the MACO, for example. So it may happen that the other two who do not have positions in terms of the executive may feel aggrieved, but that is not something that cannot be handled, because obviously everybody can't serve in positions. You are there to serve the electorate and to make sure that we have good service delivery.
Okay, 2 things that maybe we still need to get clarity on. The Democratic Alliance saying that this, they call it a hiccup, I suppose, that happened during council, is something that is temporary. Meaning that, did you get a commitment from the meeting that when next, of course, names are put forward for the council speaker, you are all going to be voting together? One, but will you again be voting for the ousted speaker, who many are saying has not really been treating people fairly?
Yes. Let me try to respond to that. I can assure you there is absolute 100% unanimous commitment by all the parties in the coalition agreement to stick to the agreement and to keep our governments going, because I've said the alternative is just to bring back the ANC, and there's no reason why we should ever do that again. So there's a total commitment and an agreement amongst the parties that we will do so, and I'm very convinced that there's a new energy within the coalition to understand our challenges. When it comes to the election of a speaker, because there's a vacancy now, we have not discussed the reality in terms of who that candidate would be. But in terms of how we operate, we will discuss it amongst ourselves. We will come to an agreement in terms of which person should be the candidate. And once we've agreed upon that, the coalition will vote for that candidate. I've got no doubt. We have not discussed who it should be, whether it should be the current incumbent again, or whether it should be somebody else. But in terms of the coalition agreement, the position of Speaker has been allocated to the Democratic Alliance. So you can understand that the nominee will come from the Democratic Alliance, but that's in terms of the agreement that we've reached when we negotiated these things.
Yeah, and as far as the anticipated motion of no confidence against the executive mayor, Dr Mpho Phalatse, you are again confident that that will fail?
Well, obviously there was an attempt last week, and if I may say, it's maybe a huge coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. In politics, nothing is a coincidence. Who knows? Maybe the ANC recently elected a new chairperson, one Mr. Lesufi, and maybe there's some new energy there to try and topple these governments. We are not unaware of what's happening. So there was an attempt to bring a motion of no confidence in the executive mayor as well. That failed because of a technicality. They tried to put the motion in terms of a certain thing that is still sub judice in front of the courts. But we are realistic. They will obviously try again. But in the meantime, we will strengthen the coalition, and when that motion is on the table, we will defeat it.
Now, of course, we're talking about the city of Johannesburg now, but there are things that are happening elsewhere, like in Nelson Mandela Bay and some other areas of the Western Cape and so on and so forth. How are you rectifying those situations?
Well, obviously, you have to deal with these coalitions one by one. There are some broad principles, and we've got the same kind of agreement, coalition agreement between the different parties, and not all the parties are involved. For example, in the Western Cape, we have about 10 coalition governments where it's only the Freedom Front Plus and the Democratic Alliance being the government. One also needs to draw a very strong distinction and understand the distinction between a majority government, like we've got in the city of Johannesburg and the city of Tshwane, and minority governments. In Ekurhuleni Metro, we've got a minority government. If we succeed in bringing a motion of no confidence in the ANC executive mayor in Nelson Mandela Bay, that will also then create a minority government. Now, minority government is very difficult to govern and to keep stable because you remain a minority, and it could go wrong that parties gang up to defeat that. We understand that. Right from the beginning, when we started with the minority government at Ekurhuleni, we knew the risk, but we've been governing there since November, serving the electorate, and we will continue doing so. If it's clear now that the ANC and the EFF wants to gang up against the best interests of the electorate, it's up to them, and they will have to face the electorate when it comes to the polls in 2024. But if you also look at what happened yesterday in Parliament, for example, between the ANC and the EFF, it seems that they are not in a position to get married soon.
Dr. Mulder, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on and clearing those issues for us. That is the chairperson of the coalition of doing oversight work there for the coalition, Dr. Corne Mulder.